Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Hello and welcome to Time Tunnel, where we find out what was making news in the past. I'm Andrea Canning in New York. Today we travel back to this day in 1972 when thousands of protesters converged on Miami trying to disrupt the Republican National Convention. Here are Howard K. Smith and Harry Reisner.
Good evening. I'm Howard K. Smith in Miami Beach.
I'm Harry Reisner. These are tonight's headlines. Thousands of demonstrators marched on the Republican Convention Center in an effort to disrupt the proceedings. President Nixon prepares to accept his party's nomination for re-election with an address on the great issues of 1972 at home and throughout the world. In Chicago, Senator McGovern meets with Mayor Daley and addresses a polite American Legion convention. And the North Vietnamese step up the pressure on Da Nang with shelling by heavy rockets. Howard?
The Republican Convention will reach its climax tonight, both inside and outside the convention hall. Inside, the delegates will hear Richard M. Nixon accept his party's nomination for the second term. Outside, peace demonstrators will stage their main event of the week, an attempt almost certain to be doomed to block the convention hall. We have reports on the outlook for the protesters and their activities today. First, ABC's Gregory Jackson.
After 2 days of minor skirmish, the young protesters here know they'll be out-organized, outgunned, and probably even outnumbered by the police tonight. In short, the mood here is that if any confrontation does develop, they will lose, at least the physical battle. But in a real sense, that's not the point. Through the long morning and deep into the afternoon, one young radical after another, leaders not seen before at demonstrations and longtime anti-war protesters such as Rennie Davis, urged their colleagues to action. The emphasis was continually placed on nonviolence, no trashing, as the kids call it. The goal tonight is as much peaceful disruption and voluntary arrests as possible. But outside of the police, two other factors are working against the demonstrators. One is nature, the other is philosophy. The nights are long, and during the day it's miserably hot in the park. Day after day of protesting is hard work, and the sleeping accommodations are earthy at best. Philosophically, it may appear that these young people are united as one and will move as one. They will not. Some are even pulling out. Others have deep reservations about the evening.
It's not the question of arrest. It's the question to me of violence or nonviolence. I came down here to protest the war, and I'm against violence completely, and I can't see how we can protest violence. And then some people, which are going to go over there and try to start hassles and break things and really just want to have a confrontation with the police.
As evening approaches, one segment has left the park and is marching toward the delegates' hotels. Another early contingent has arrived here in front of Convention Hall. Before the night's over, all the protesters expect to be here in the convention area, some looking to get arrested, others not. Either way, the police say they're amply prepared, as ABC's Lem Tucker reports.
While many of the demonstrators slept, police were getting ready. First, to help keep the protesters at a distance, they built a wall of buses around most of Convention Hall. By noon, thousands of officers were reporting for duty. The inside of the main entrance will be protected by more than 1,500 Miami and Miami Beach policemen. Sheriff's deputies will help handle some of the side entrances. Florida Highway Patrolmen, with help from other agencies, will be ready to take to the streets to make sure this convention is not disrupted. Some shopkeepers have already protected against the possibility of trouble. Any crowd near the hall will be thoroughly infiltrated with Secret Service, FBI, and other plainclothes agents. There'll be no attempt to hide their presence because the emphasis here is on a massive show of force. And if all the immediately available force can't handle things, 2,000 National Guardsmen will be ready at a nearby high school. And 20 miles away, 2,500 Marines and paratroopers are ready. All this force is here to make sure it is safe for the President to come to Convention Hall tonight, and to make sure that all delegates and guests who want to be inside to hear him can indeed get in. At least the first phase of this massive security operation can be called a success. Some of the non-delegates arrived here, built what they call a sandbagged dike, blocking the main street in front of the convention hall. But that is exactly the way the police intended it. These buses have blocked off the rest of the streets. keeping open those streets, keeping the gates open so delegates can enter and leave freely. That's the way police intended it, and police hope that the rest of the security operation will be just as successful. This is Lem Tucker, ABC News, outside Convention Hall.
The major events on tonight's formal convention schedule are the nomination of Spiro Agnew as vice presidential candidate, the vice president's acceptance speech, and the acceptance speech by President Nixon. That will be the first fully political speech by the president in this campaign. ABC White House correspondent Tom Jarrell reports on Mr. Nixon's preparations.
The president has remained within the secure privacy of his compound here at Key Biscayne, scribbling minor changes in his acceptance speech and conferring with aides on the upcoming political campaign. The White House cautions against expecting any major new announcements in tonight's acceptance speech. Style, tone, and perspective are being stressed rather than any new substance. We're told the acceptance speech will focus on the sharp differences on issues between the Nixon forces and the Democratic opposition. Differences which have led both nominees to agree voters this year will have the clearest choice of the century. The president will continue his strong appeal for support from young voters, stress the need for continued heavy defense spending to maintain foreign commitments, and he's expected to defend his Vietnam policies once again as being the only honorable way out. We're told the White House is still hopeful that negotiations to end the war will be successful, but the prospect for any breakthrough anytime soon is now being played down. Following his speech tonight, the president will try to keep his political momentum going in an address tomorrow in Chicago to the American Legion Convention, a high school dedication tomorrow in another big electoral vote state, Michigan, and then conclude the day on the Pacific Coast with a political rally in San Diego. Tom Jarrell, ABC News, Key Biscayne, Florida.
We continue our journey back in time to this day in 1972 when the American Legion heard from George McGovern. Here's how it went.
The American Legion obviously doesn't think much of George McGovern's plans for massive cuts in defense spending, but Legionnaires gave McGovern a polite hearing today at their convention in Chicago. The Democratic candidate also had his delayed meeting with Chicago Mayor Richard Daley. A report on McGovern's day now from ABC's Bill Matney.
The Chicago visit today clearly was a peace mission, and before the cool but polite American Legion audience, George McGovern seemed not to be seeking converts so much as he was an understanding and clarification of his positions.
There is so much political baloney about me circulating both in the press and on the part of my opponents that I think it may be well to pause for a moment and offer a bit of personal testimony. First of all, with every fiber of my being, I love America. It is the greatest nation in the world, and I gladly offer my life in whatever way I can to preserve the greatness of this country.
Aware of the Legionnaires' hostility to his proposed defense cuts and war position, McGovern strengthened his pledge of a strong armed posture, even while calling for elimination of what he called fat and waste from the budget.
And I assure you that no hostile power will succeed in threatening this country if I become the president. No foreign country will push us around. We will always have sufficient power to resist attack, the threat of attack, or diplomacy by blackmail.
The high point of McGovern's day was an extended meeting with Chicago Mayor Richard Daley and the public pledge of solidarity that McGovern had sought and both men conveyed at an afternoon news conference.
Illinois will be in the Democratic column for the entire ticket in November.
Mr. Mayor, will the Democratic organization in this county work to turn out the vote for Governor McGovern?
It turns out the vote in every election, and it's been its tradition and history as long as I've been around here, and before that the Democratic Party of Cook County and of Chicago is for the entire ticket. We're Democrats, and we're for everyone on the ticket.
And we intend to work closely with Mayor Daley. We welcome his support. We welcome his endorsement, and we'll be campaigning for the united Democratic victory here in Illinois on November 7th.
4 years ago, any suggestion of a détente between Richard Daley and George McGovern would have been considered ridiculous and impossible. But politics creates unlikely allies, and it is just such unlikely alliances that George McGovern will continue to seek across the country for a realistic chance of an upset win in November. Bill Matney, ABC News, with the McGovern campaign, Chicago.
McGovern's running mate, Sergeant Shriver, is currently campaigning in the South, but apparently not with overwhelming success. Shriver had a joint news conference scheduled in Atlanta this afternoon with Georgia Governor Jimmy Carter. Carter stepped up to the microphone, said he was glad to see candidates campaigning in Georgia. Then he abruptly walked out. Earlier in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Shriver acknowledged that if the election were held today, there would be a landslide victory for President Nixon. But Shriver added that an upward trend for McGovern will gather strength as the campaign moves forward. George McGovern's finance director, Henry Kimmelman, said today that McGovern campaign headquarters have received several $1 million in contributions during the past month. Kimmelman said most contributors had sent less than $100 apiece, but that larger amounts had come from a number of millionaires, some of them young and with inherited wealth.
One of the strangest hijack attempts to date began yesterday when two gunmen held up a bank in Brooklyn, New York. The gunmen got $29,000, but before they could leave, police moved in and the bank robbers seized 8 hostages. It all ended 15 hours later at New York's Kennedy Airport. ABC's Charles Burke has the story.
With his partner inside pointing a shotgun at 8 employees, the other robber spent much of his time pacing outside the bank, either negotiating with police or screaming at them to back off. Police in turn tried to keep the pressure down by ordering the hundreds of spectators to move.
All right, fellas, you gotta move back.
The more visible bank robber is 27-year-old John Wojtowicz, an out-of-work New York City resident and an admitted homosexual who left his wife and 2 children 3 years ago. Yesterday, Wojtowicz insisted the man he described as his current wife, a 26-year-old psychiatric patient, be brought to the bank. He was, but after talking with the gunman, refused to join them. Later, the 2 bank robbers demanded a plane at Kennedy Airport and a car to get them there. Finally, around 3:30 this morning, an airport limousine pulled up at the bank with an FBI agent at the wheel. Only then did the second gunman come out of the bank, a rifle slung over his shoulder. 26-year-old Salvatore Naciarelli then joined Wojtowicz and their hostages in the limousine and headed for Kennedy Airport. Along the way, they had plenty of company. Perhaps 40 cars followed, carrying police and relatives of the hostages. The caravan would pass through an airport gate leading to a secluded runway. The bank robbers had hoped to make their escape in a small jet plane. They failed.
The aircraft was rolling up, and as we were making plans to depart from the limousine, we had a driver in the limousine, an agent, and Mr. Baker, Mr. Feld charged the men and diverted the shotgun and the machine gun, and in the meantime, the agent had a chance to shoot him, and when one was shot, the other immediately gave up.
Naciarelli was killed by the FBI. Wojtowicz is in jail. Although none of the hostages was injured, understandably none showed up for work today either. As for the bank itself, it considered the matter closed. Charles Burke, ABC News, New York.
That's tonight's news and a comment. I'm Harry Reasoner. Good night.
This has been the ABC Evening News with Howard K. Smith and Harry Reasoner, Monday through Friday in color.
That's all the time tunnel we have for today. Now back to the present with ABC News Now.
And what you can do for your country. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.